order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker.
Here.
We have a quorum. Also, let the record reflect that President Brady is in attendance.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And has anybody signed in for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Okay, you have in your packets the minutes for the April 29th meeting on that day, 2019. Is there a motion? It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes for April 29th, 2019 as presented. And is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion is approved and the minutes are approved as presented. Matters referred to the committee are none. And our major item for today is our review of the first quarter financial report. And before Ms. Keenan begins, I would start by mentioning the fact that that you provided us the report on time and a week before the hearing, giving us sufficient time to review the information before today's meeting, and you've been very diligent and very consistent, and I just have to say that the stability and diligence that you provide us about working through the county's financial issues does not go unnoticed and is much appreciated, and your leadership and professionalism are very valuable, and we appreciate it. And I'd like to mention that Ms. Simon has arrived, apparently. She had to step out for just a minute, but she is here. And I'll call on the director to please proceed.
Good afternoon, Maggie Keenan, Office of Budget and Management. I want to thank you, Councilman Miller, for your kind words. I really appreciate that. I want to be very clear that the credit is due to the staff in OBM. I get the pleasure of standing up here, but they're the ones who do the hard work. And I will say, just to give them proper credit, that this particular report was a bit of a doozy just because we are working without a budget and reporting system. And so I really do appreciate all of their efforts. Most of them are back there. So I just want to give a little bit of extra credit out there. And okay, thank you, ma'am. So I'm going to do what I always do when I come up here, which is a very brief, very general overview. This time we're looking only at the general fund and the HHS levy funds. As always, please feel free to interrupt me if something doesn't make sense or if you want additional information. I'm happy to do that as I go. That just makes more sense. And I have a couple of qualifications because this is a little bit different than what you're used to. And I'll start by saying, hopefully you read in the report that for the general fund, we have combined the general operating fund and the 0.25% fund. Those were previously separated for reporting purposes only. That was not a legally required separation. So for ease of reporting, for ease of just workload, and because it made more sense given the way that fund had been used more recently, we are now combining the two. So what we're looking at now is just the general fund.
Yeah, just a comment on that. Historically, we've had up to 3 general funds. There's the narrow general fund, there's the general fund with the 0.25%, and sometimes the general fund plus the HHS levy has been treated together as kind of a general fund, and I've always found that confusing. I think that having a single general fund, that when you talk about the general fund, you know what you're referring to, sort of what Zig Berzins refers to as his single version of the truth when he talks about the ERP schedule. You know, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you. We agree, clearly. So we have made this change beginning in 2019. Yes. Oh,
sure.
sorry.
Just on that same topic, I guess I kind of liked the segregation only because it was voted on for, at that time, I thought a specific purpose, but then, you know, over time, it continued. And it does sunset in 2027.
It does.
There is a, you know, another conversation that has to take place to renew that or let it sunset. So
Absolutely.
I found it, but it is, I think if I read in your documents, you do have it noted, don't you, as where those funds come from?
We do, and I can make sure to do a better job of really clarifying how much revenue is brought in that from that additional tax specifically. So you know when we're talking about sales tax, how much theoretically might go away if that additional 0.25% is not renewed. So I can make sure I do that so that you still get kind of the feel of the segregation. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a legal restriction when it was voted on, so it was general purpose, and really the debt service on the medical mart, now the
what it
GC,
was.
it's not supposed to be paid, it's non-tax revenue, so we're not using sales tax for that. So it did make more sense to combine them. It's, I hate to say this, but it is a lot of effort on our part to do the separate projections, but I can make sure that I'm very clear what is really attributed to that so that you know what we potentially will lose.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any
thank
other
you.
questions? Okay. So for revenue, 2019, we're projecting revenue to total about 460 million. This is 28 million higher than the budget, 29 million more than what we estimated for 2019 at third quarter of last year. Most of that change is attributed, well, a good deal of the change is attributed to the change in the chart of accounts, which I'll get into in a little bit, but also increases in property tax, sales tax, and investment earnings. I'll talk about sales tax separately, but property tax, if you recall, when I was here last year, I did say we'd see an increase associated with the sexennial appraisal. At the time, I was a little hesitant to quantify that. I said probably about $2 million, but we wanted to see what happens with how many complaints we received. So I am now confidently projecting a little over $2 million increase in property tax revenue this year. And investment earnings is up about $4 million. And that increase is not, unfortunately, a reflection of the market or the portfolio. It's just a little bit of a delay in the timing of when I got information from the treasurer's office. No error on their part, but we just didn't have a great estimate. There was a vacancy in the treasurer's office, so there's a little bit of a delay in who I was talking to. But then also this revenue reflects revenue that comes in from the casino tax fund, which was previously in a special revenue fund, as well as the certificate of title revenue, which is the automobile and boat titles that we do down in the fiscal office, and then a very, very small portion of fees that are charged by the coroner or the medical examiner that used to be in the coroner's lab fund that's now also in the general fund with this new chart of accounts. Expenditures are projected to total 486 million in 2019. That's 22 million under budget, but don't get too excited. I want to talk about that. 22 million higher than what we had projected for 2019 last year, but if you adjust for the chart of accounts, that variance between the third quarter estimate and this first quarter estimate is only about 4 million. It's less than 4 million, which is less than 1%. And that's largely attributed to the timing of the loan for the Lumen project, Playhouse Square. So we had anticipated that would be paid out last year. It wasn't. So now it's in our projections for this year. We are projecting surpluses in almost every agency and departmental budget. The few agencies where we are projecting shortfalls, it's largely attributed to benefits. So that's the hospitalization rates. And that's hitting some of our smaller agencies that really don't have other expenses to kind of mask that error in the budget. After accounting for our reserves on balance, we are projecting an ending cash balance of about 119 million. That's 28% of total expenditures. As everyone's well aware, we do have the 25% minimum cash balance requirement. in the general fund. So we are projected to be above that for 2019 and actually 2020. So I am noting here, because we're going to talk later, but I assume everyone has hopefully glanced at the report that we submitted. We have some issues on the levy side. So I just want to note here that were the general fund to subsidize the HHS levy fund this year, that would reduce the cash balance in the general fund to 112 million, which would be 23% of total expenditures. So that is slightly below where we want to be, where we should be according to the code. So I do want to point out, in the general fund, we have an operating deficit, which means that we are bringing in less revenue than we're spending. That is largely attributed to capital projects. So I feel like I've been talking about this forever, but we have large-scale capital projects, the Harvard Garage project, Public Works, the Cleveland Police Headquarters project, the ERP. Those are all projected to be spent this year. Actually, that's on my next slide. And so if you take all of those out, our operating shortfall is reduced to just a couple $1 million. So we're not in as bad shape as it appears with a 20 million plus operating deficit if you back that out. And our cash balance had been built up for years really to accommodate this. Had we issued debt for those projects, they would have cost much more when you factor in cost of issuance and interest rates.
So how much was the total of the capital projects for 2019?
It's about 20 million
20 million.
combined. And we are assuming that that's all going to be spent in 2019. So if you look on the next slide, which I've just advanced, this is the 5-year forecast. Like I said, we're assuming all this will be done in 2019. I certainly don't see any issue with the public works projects. The ERP project, I have no idea, just with the timing of the rollouts, if there are going to be payments made later next year. But for now, we're assuming all of 2019. For the future years, I am assuming a 2% increase on all salaries, 1% increase in benefits. So that's already factored into these. For the most part, that's what we've negotiated with our bargaining units. Looking ahead at 2023, the general fund's going to have to pick up debt service on the Western Reserve debt that was issued in 2014, I believe. That was $784,000. We've been paying that out of the Job Creation Fund for the last several years. That was one of the executives' recommended budget reductions in the 18-19 budget. But that debt service increases to almost $3 million in 2023, and the Job Creation Fund, I'm assuming, isn't going to have it, because that would pretty much stifle all of our economic development activity. That's a decision that will have to be made executive and council, but for now we are assuming the general fund's going to pick that up again.
So, Director, you said the capital projects account for 20 million out of the 25.5 million in the 2019 general fund.
That's correct.
Difference between revenues and expenditures. Can you tell us what accounts for the rest of it?
So a lot of it is Lumen. The Lumen payment is $10 million. So that pretty much is everything. We would otherwise have an operating surplus if we didn't have all the capital projects and the Lumen project, which we all knew about, but it's just the timing of it. We thought that distribution would be made last year.
Okay.
But Lumen is, for now at least, 5 million general fund, 5 million economic development fund.
Okay, and Ms. Brown, for the record, has joined us. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Yes, you may.
How does the MCO loss of sales tax play into the numbers that you're giving us now?
So those are factored in, obviously. We stopped collecting that tax in late 2017. All in all, we had projected originally that we would lose about 10%, of the sales tax, $30 million. The impact was a little bit less. The loss was, I believe, 6 or 7%. But sales tax has been, I'll advance to the next slide, but sales tax has been performing
Right.
wildly. So the impact wasn't really as severe for us, because we had been assuming back in 2017 that we would grow sales tax no more than 2% every year. And at the time, I think that some people thought that might be too aggressive, and we are up 6% in 19 versus last year. So sales tax has been like off the charts great. I'm not entirely sure why, knock on wood, but we've been doing really well. So actually the MCO, I mean, it's not to say that it wasn't a hit. We took a hit. Any dollar amount in this county is significant, but it wasn't the 30 million that we expected.
That's good to hear.
It's good to hear it, but it was still a hit. If any of our friends in Columbus are listening, it was a huge hit.
May I ask a specific question
Yes.
on the larger packet that you gave us that is pertaining to what you're talking about? You
Okay.
may have already explained this, but under the new chart of accounts and the old chart of account,
Yes.
there is a significant difference between the operating surplus of the new and the old for the operating expenses. I just wondered why. I think it was like a $14 million difference.
Right. So most of that is going to be the casino
Okay.
tax fund. We bring in about $7.5 million in revenue to the casino fund. It fluctuates a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that that's what we're assuming this year is it's going to be about $7.5 million. We generally don't appropriate that fund until we have approved projects. In the beginning, we had appropriated, huge amounts of money and we just end up with surpluses. So as the council makes decisions on how they want to spend those dollars, then we come forward and appropriate it. But so we're showing right now, we're not going to spend the full amount that we're bringing in. So that's part of it. And also in the title fund, they operate with a surplus. So they're bringing in more revenue than they spend as well. So that masks a little bit the operating deficit in what previously was the general fund, if you exclude those funds that are now coming into the general fund.
So if I may, so the old chart of accounts, which this is just a reporting, two different types of reporting.
Right.
That reporting system would not have taken that into account?
That's correct. Right. So that's why we included both. If you're curious at looking at, based on prior years, if you want to look at what were we spending last year, what are we spending this year, if you're checking like our accuracy rates, that's why we included the old chart of accounts, because with the new chart of accounts, I'd have to put 1,000 qualifiers in there, and it doesn't really give you an apples to apples comparison.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So, Director, to follow up on that, the new chart of accounts includes the casino revenue fund, it includes the title fund, and one other that you
The
mentioned.
coroner's lab fund. All three of which I will point out, we are separating by what's called activities in the new financial system, so we can segregate the cash balance. Because the casino fund, the general fund's not rating casino to take all the money. We still will segregate those cash balances.
So, if the casino fund is bringing in 7.5 million that isn't appropriated till later, and the title fund is bringing in more money than it spends, why does the new chart of accounts, which includes those items, have a larger operating deficit than the old chart of accounts?
I'll have to get back to you then on casino. Maybe we are showing this year that we're going to spend more on casino. It's casino, I'm sure, but I'll have to get back to you on that then.
Right.
Any other questions?
Councilman Sean.
I can only assume that the sales tax is a result of activity going on in the economy and people willing to buy stuff and transactions. Why would you necessarily assume that by 2020 we're going to see a slowdown to where it's only 2%? What's your fundamental background why you're picking that up?
So I'm basing that.
That's a big drop from 6%.
It's a huge drop.
6
yeah.
to 2 is a huge drop.
It's a huge drop. So I am basing that on largely talking with the other urban counties in the state of Ohio, RTA, who's only assuming a 2% this year, and CCAO in the state of Ohio. So I look at all of their revenue projections, and everyone is forecasting, the drop, because we're going to get the recession that we've been waiting for 5 years. So I anticipate that I'll be revising these estimates, but for now, I'm just kind of following the line. I'm not an economist, so I don't want to be out on my own with a 6% increase every year. And if everyone else is saying we're going to drop, I have nothing to substantiate keeping it higher at this time.
Okay, good. By the time you move it from 6 to 2, you're almost back to break even at that point.
Yeah, right.
Because that's a trending.
Right.
You say we're at 6, and you're trending it down to 2. That's actually a faster fall than that. It would indicate that
Absolutely.
that you're going to show a 0 ultimately if you're trending to 2, because that's just the.
Absolutely.
Are we picking up anything other than taxing sources for that? Are you picking up any of the economists at all as far as in your forecasting of that, or are you just looking at other folks doing their tax analysis?
Other people that are doing their tax analysis.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I would hope.
I can reach out to Cleveland State. I know they do.
We'll check out with our
economic-
investment. We have an investment advisory firm upstairs that's giving us advice on the financial side. So perhaps not the internal, the external.
Right. The meter. Yeah. I was just talking to them. I can talk to them more about this.
Thank you.
I would also add that the 6% number is only based on like 4 months of data, and there's monthly fluctuations, and I would be surprised if we sustained a 6% year-over-year change even for this year.
So as of first quarter, I'm assuming a 5% increase, just because I feel like I have to be somewhat cynical by nature of this position. January and February receipts were ridiculously high. They were 13% and 11% over month to month. So I'm looking at January to January. It's not just the difference between January and February. And I can't explain it. The state couldn't explain it. I've asked everybody. Nobody can explain it. Then we did dip in March and April, which I am attributing largely to the federal shutdown. March and April would have been December and January, December of 2018 and January of this year. So this month, I was looking at, this might be kind of the bellwether of what's happening for this year. And this month, we were up 6%. So I don't know. I mean, I take it month by month. This is what I've always done with sales tax. I'm usually pretty accurate with the sales tax projection, certainly within the year. And I will reach out to see what we're doing for the future. But unless something horrible happens for the rest of the month, but we're already up 6%. I don't see us going down that far.
It's the kind of problem you want.
It's the kind of problem we want, and we've got the Major League Baseball, the All-Star Game coming. We'll see those receipts in October. So even if we were to dip, just kind of naturally, that should bring us up a little bit, because that's a whole weekend of activities.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the things that I've seen as a suggestion would be, instead of using month to month, you use a 12-month moving and a 3-month moving, so you can see is a 3-month trend. You're actually moving 3 months constantly, 1 month adding, 1 month dropping off, and 12 months. I think you'll get a smoother projection out there in regards to it. And if you find that the 12-12 is moving in the right direction, then I think it's going to give you a better handle. Mm-hmm. And if you want to look at the quarterly, you move it on a 3-month 12 average, so you can see the two.
I do look at quarterly, so I do the projections about 4 different ways and then kind of see how we're looking. They're all turning out the same.
And this is not quarterly. This is 3 months, so that the 3 months is always one falls off, the next one has.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, so any questions on the general fund before I move to the levies? So looking at the Health and Human Services Levy Fund, we are projecting revenue this year to total $244 million. For 2020 and 2021, we're assuming it's going to go back down to $240 million. The $4 million difference was a repayment of an advance made to one of our special revenue funds last year. So that money came back into the HHS Levy Fund earlier this year. Again, there is no change to the levy revenue resulting from the appraisal, so that should be pretty constant. We do get the benefit of...
That's because that's under control of House Bill 920.
920, that's correct. So we do get the benefit of new values, if there's new construction, but nothing from the appraisal. On the expenditure side, we are assuming that expenses are going to total about $261 million in 2019. I'm assuming no change to the payments to Metro and the Adams Board in 2019, 20, or 21. Those total about $75 million every year. Then the remaining expenditures out of this fund are subsidies to other county funds, which are going to total about $189 million in 2019. We are about $4.5 million over budget. We are $9 million over what we projected for 2019 at 2018's third quarter. This increase is largely attributed to CFS. I'll talk about that in a minute. And again, like I said, no changes to Metro and the Adams Board. So just looking at some of the differences, as council's aware, we do the fiscal agenda, which is where we ask for budget changes. We have had a number of fairly large budget changes to HHS throughout 2019. So I'm breaking it down by divisions, but in the administrative division, we've increased appropriation by about $600,000. $500,000 of that was for the first year Cleveland contract. That's to address infant mortality. And $500,000 is what we have spent in previous years. JFS, Job and Family Services, has had increased totaling $1.1 million. This was to add 20 new, I'm not entirely certain what their job title is, but call center workers to address the wait times in the call center to make sure those are staying within the, either at or better than what the state average is. Senior and Adult Services, we've had a $600,000 increase in appropriation to expand the options program. This is to eliminate the wait list. And so based on the data we received from Senior Adult, that means about 250 more seniors will be served through the options program. And then Children and Family Services has had about $7 million increase to their budget this year in 2019. The first we did as part of the 2019 budget update, so that was that first fiscal agenda we submitted. That was $3 million, and that was just essentially to right-size their budget. So in 2018, DCFS had taken a $2 million cut to its personnel line. That's what was submitted as part of the executive's recommended budget, which they couldn't sustain that. So we did increase their budget last year, and then we had to increase it this year, which will cover at the time what we thought their personnel expenses would be. They have since had a little bit more to personnel because we are assuming the hiring of 20 new social workers as part of the expert panel recommendations. That increase was $1.6 million. And then they've recently asked for additional funding to have an additional 20 social workers. So that's 40 new social workers total. And this is largely to address the number of kids in custody, which I have a graph there that shows the numbers just keep going up every week. I track these every Monday, and they're just going up, up, up. I can give you the data from 2015, 16, but those numbers would not even be on the charts. They were so much lower. So this is a trend that, we kept hoping would level off or go back down, and it's just going up and up. As a result, I'm sorry.
Over maybe 5 or 6 years, we've gone from 2,000 to 2,600.
Oh yeah, we've gone from 18 to 1,700 to now 2,700.
Yeah, it's just a phenomenal increase.
That's a good word to describe it.
Ticking
Yes.
up a few every week for years, and it's made a huge difference.
It's literally. So I think we've had, I'd have to confirm this, but there have been a handful of weeks and literally one handful where we stayed the same. Other than that, there's been an increase every week. So as a result, we've also had to increase our contract with Metro Health, which provides healthcare for the children in our custody. And then we've seen an increase in board and care costs. So I put just to note for you, in 2018, we were spending an average of $4.3 million every month on board and care. In 2019, looking at January through April, the average was $4.8 million. So that's an additional $500,000 a month. In this May, and I don't know what the date is, but it's only mid-May, we've already spent $4.6 million. So May is going to be, I would assume, much higher than that average of $4.8 million. So we have an issue on the levy side. I assume that's where we're going to have the rest of our conversation. Questions? Yes.
Councilman Tron.
The positions that they were expanding in this area, would any of those be any positions that would line up with nurses' positions from any other part of the county government that could be utilized and placed in there to be a transfer position?
I can't say definitively. That's a question for Director Weiskettel. My understanding is that all of the social service workers are licensed social workers, and so the licensure is different. Now, whether a RN can substitute for an LSW, I wouldn't know that. I can ask and find out, but I don't know.
But if the services are being provided by Metro as an assistant, I
Oh,
assume
for
some
that
of-
contract.
Yeah, I would assume that there ought to be some places that we could perhaps move laterally.
Yeah.
Folks that are coming out of another part of the county that are looking for a job.
Yeah, we can certainly ask about that.
would not
If there's
lose
any way to
benefits.
clinic people or triage them here.
Benefits, it'd be a
Yeah.
direct transfer, they would stay within the state system.
Yeah, no, I never thought about that, so I will follow up on that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ms. Baker?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the options program.
Yes.
That has been and has and continues to be a very important program. I see you have eliminates wait lists and adds 250 more individuals served. Is that?
No.
Okay.
So it's 250 more individuals served, and it will eliminate the wait list, but it's not, the 250 are on the wait list.
Got it. If I may, do we know that 250 was the wait list? Is that what we're saying?
Yes. So the data we had is like a month or two old, and it was like 260 something, but I'm rounding just for ease. But that would eliminate the wait list, we were told.
Thank you.
Director, as you know, when we passed the budget for the juvenile court, which includes a good amount of money from the levy fund as well as the general fund.
21 million from the
Yeah,
levies.
we gave them an increase in funding for 2018, but we gave them a fairly low allocation for 2019 with the idea that they would take the intervening time to find ways to reduce costs and operate within a lower budget. And the question is whether they've had any amount of success in accomplishing that, or are they running considerably over their 2019 budget?
No, they've had an amazing success. So I believe that we are still showing a slight operating deficit, right, in next year? Yeah, on the general fund side, so we are, I think it's 300,000 that we're showing that they would be over budget in the general fund. They have a surplus on the levy side, so, we have the option of transferring expenses if we wanted to, so they would be balanced. But next year, we are showing that they will be able to live within the cut that, or that's this year, sorry. Yeah, so we are showing that they're going to be operating within budget, save for maybe 300,000. But the court has done, they really do deserve a lot of credit. The court has done some amazing things in terms of increasing some fees, but also just doing a much better job on the collection of the fees that they'd already been charging. They're doing a really in-depth look at using our OBM analysts, looking at staffing and scheduling to try to address their overtime. Juvenile court's overtime was not only crazy high, but it also was negatively correlated with the ADP. So despite what you would think, when the ADP was lower, their overtime actually went up. I shouldn't be laughing, but but they are aware of this now, and they've been looking at it, and overtime has come down. So the court, I don't think, is going to be an issue.
So do you think what they've accomplished is going to be sustainable in 2021 and 2022?
I do.
You do?
I do.
Okay. Well, that's good news. But there is other news that is definitely not good. And so before we move on, I would just like to bring two numbers to everybody's attention so that I think need to help guide our discussion. And although these numbers are almost the same, they actually have to do with two entirely different things. And the first one is that Health and Human Services Levy Fund is currently projected to run out of money sometime during this year and to end 2019 about $7 million underwater, and at current trends to end 2020 at 33.5 million underwater, meaning that the general fund would have to subsidize the levy fund to the tune of 33.5 million just to get us through 2020, which is when the current levy would expire, and presuming that we don't try to do anything on an emergency basis, we would have to provide that subsidy just to get us through to when we could possibly get more money. And the second statistic, and this is on page 22 of the full report, which is that in the year 2021, which would be the first year that we would operate under the next levy, whatever it is, at current revenue levels, we're projecting an operating deficit of 34 million, meaning that current revenues would fall $34 million short of our expected expenditures, and that number goes up every year by something like 5 or 6 million because of the fact that the levy is a constant source of revenue where we have cost of living and other such things. So we have a very serious and immediate problem going forward. Ms. Baker.
Yes, and kind of a backtrack to what you just stated, which is certainly worth noting. I just wanted to ask on the 1.1 million increase for the 20 new call center workers. That was a pretty big deal at the time that we expanded that, because people were trying to break through. And how, given that we're talking about some successes, I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask, but
I have a success.
okay. I just wondered, how is that? Is that been adequate?
It has been. I didn't bring that paper with me. You'll get this in your May monthly update, so you're getting us a teaser. But there were several days, I believe it was last month, where the call center wait times were much, much lower than the state, with the other counties and the state average. And I think there was also several days where we've had the lowest wait that we've ever had. Wow. So that's working very well on the JFS side in the call center.
That's good to know.
They're doing a really, really great job. I'm waiting for, I got some data from them, but I'm waiting to hear back from the director, because I know he wants to, beef it up to really say how well they're doing, but they're doing very, very well.
Yes.
I just want to add to what Maggie said. For Councilwoman Baker, I did see Director Merriman, and he said that the rate was 85%, and I think somewhere around the wait time had been reduced to 5 minutes or less. So,
And I think it had been 12 minutes or something. I mean, it's a significant decrease.
Director, following up on the 33.5 million number, which is the number that, according to current trends, we would have to subsidize the levy fund with to get us through 2020. Is there anything that you're aware of that's relatively easy and painless that can bring down that number? I'm talking about things like if there's contracts where we appropriated more money than we know they're going to need, and things. Is there stuff out there that can bring this number down, or is this number pretty hard and solid?
So these are projections. I will say that. Don't take
Of
anything that
always.
it's set in
Of
stone. We think they're pretty good. Generally, we do pretty well with our projections, but these can change. It's first quarter. As to whether there's now, so also just in terms of contracts, these projections are based on what we think is going to be spent. So it's not what the contract is necessarily approved for. So we've already taken that into consideration because we do have a handful of contracts, and rightfully so, where they say they need $1 million contract, but we know they're going to probably spend less. So we've already assumed the spending less in these figures. I'm going to venture to guess that somebody will have to start my car if I stand up here and say that we have easy opportunities to cut in the HHS levy fund. I think at this point, anything we do is going to impact services in some way. How detrimental that is, I can't say. That's a question for the director. Walter, you would ask him. But I think anything we do at this point is likely going to impact services.
Okay,
And so
that's
this is
what
going
we
to
need
require
know.
some prioritization.
Okay. Yes.
Given that, I'll address the elephant in the room. Is there some talk amongst the administration to get the HHS levy back in balance, a proposal of some sort?
It's something that we're always talking about. I don't have a plan at this point that I can present to you. The executive's well aware of the issues. I think he's always looking at opportunities to reduce spending, but I don't have anything that I can report at this time.
So no talks of increasing the levy?
That's an option that has certainly been discussed. I mean, we would be remiss if we didn't consider all of our options, but I will not say up here now that that's the plan that we're going with. Nobody has told me that that's what we're going to do yet.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tron.
I know Mr. Miller was asking the half full side of the glass. And you had also alluded to the sales tax being a slight forecasting of lower numbers. On the flip side, without getting into specifics of it, there's the half empty side also, as we know that we self-fund. And we know that there are active pieces of litigation that have already been filed against the county. Where are you on the ranging of that? And I'm not asking you to forecast any confidential information, but do you have a half-empty side glass that you've got forecasted also?
I don't. So what's included in our forecast as it relates to settlements are only approved settlements. So any litigation that's not been disposed of at this point is nowhere in the numbers.
So even though they're on the books and we've already been served, you don't have any forecasting numbers into any of that stuff?
No.
And so if those active pieces of litigation should go in an incorrect, well, you have nothing forecasted at all?
No.
So not even a penny has been against active litigation?
No. As a matter of
Okay.
policy, we don't do that. So we don't want to, budget for 50 million, so we don't do that. But the only thing in here is what has already been settled. So if we settle, a month from now for any dollar amount, you'll have to subtract that actual dollar amount from the current or add it to the current expenses.
Okay, I would actually ask counsel at some point along the way. Obviously, litigation is something that is allowed to be done in executive session. If you build that together with the budget, is that allowed to be discussed in executive session? I'd ask you to do some research on that as to whether you can combine those two topics into one at that point in time.
Okay. I'll talk to Joe.
So to my colleague, when you started to characterize my discussion about the HHS levy as the half full side, I wondered what the half empty side could be, but you did come up with a whopper that is
The
on the
other
horizon.
elephant?
There's no question.
And the only reason I suggested it was a half full side, because that's an item that you have an activity and the ability to make a decision on. The other potentially is outside of our control.
And Director, am I correct that we don't have any line item or account in the budget that's used for the payment of claims without any specific claims being attached to it. Is that correct?
We do have a line item in the budget that's used for payment of claims. It's it's reflected in the, if you look at it by department, it's reflected as a self-insurance fund. That's where we pay settlement costs. But right now, like I said, it's only what's been paid so far this year.
And how much was budgeted for that fund in the current?
I think it was about 500,000. About 500,000.
Insignificant compared to what potentially
come.
could be out there. Okay.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure, getting back to the HHS levy fund, that everybody is clear on the timing. The timing is that we have two Health and Human Services levies. One of them extends through the end of 2020, and the other one extends through the end of 2024. And so the normal schedule is that the expectation is that we would need to put a levy issue on the ballot in the spring primary next year, either a renewal or an increase, and that unless we tried to do something this year, the money from the new levy that was passed would not go into effect until the beginning of 2021. So that's why I was talking about the 33.5 million that the current projection says we would need to get through the end of next year when the current levy expires.
So I do, if I may, the options for the levies, you have the option to renew, you have the option to replace with an increase, and you have the option to replace at the same millage, which captures the new values. So that would bring in another about 4 million or something like that. So there are three options available to the county.
Right. Yes. Council President Brady.
Just a reminder that the spring primary next year is not in spring. It's early in March.
Thank
March
you.
10th. That's correct. March 10th,
Yeah,
2020.
I've been saying May.
Yeah. It's not in
Also,
May.
if I may just point out too, as it relates to the budget process, which doesn't necessarily help us this year, but it could. So we have started the budget process early. We're already started. Generally, we don't start the budget process until August, July, August. And this year we kicked it off, I think it was sometime in February, late February, early March. But agencies have been requested to prepare different scenarios of reductions. So we're looking at 5%, 10% on both the general fund and levy side. Now, we don't necessarily need that much on the general fund side, but we're asking anyway, because we want to make sure that we present to the decision makers what the options are, what it would look like if you did cut 10%. I think, you need to make these decisions. You need to know what is at stake if we were to implement a 10% cut. We are also asking the agencies, though, to include, if they do have any requests for new funding, additional funding, to include that. We have not asked for those for years. We've been doing cuts since 2008, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 years. And we're doing that because just personally, I think that some of the departments and some of the directors have been a little bit cut off at the knees. Maybe their creativity's been stifled a bit because we haven't really been asking what would they do if money were no issue. So we are doing both, that we will then present to the executive, present to council, what all those options are. And we're actually assuming, based on the calendar that we set, that we're going to get those plans back in the next month. So OBM is now meeting with all of the departments to review with them, to talk about opportunities. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. But all of this is happening much earlier. And so we might then identify something, if there's a way to lop off some expenses in 2019, that, personnel probably wouldn't be an issue. But if there are contracts that we can cut, those will come to the surface in a matter of the next month or two.
Okay, that's good to know. Ms. Baker?
Given that the primary is March 10th, when is the deadline to make a decision to be in that March 10th? Is that a December, November of this year?
December 11th.
December 11th? Yeah, because that's really what, you know, we have to really think about.
December 11th is the filing deadline.
Right.
But I think, particularly if we decide we're going to request an increase, which the numbers certainly seem to suggest the need for, at least on the face of it. You know, I think that we would have to be moving on it much sooner than that. For one example, and this example would apply both to an increase or a renewal. The Greater Cleveland Partnership has suggested that they would like to hear a minimum of 150 days in advance of any issue that's going on the ballot, so that they have time to review and come to a conclusion about it. And I think that requesting an increase would be difficult under any circumstances, but after what we went through with the reappraisal,
Absolutely.
you know,
You'll want to campaign early.
It's a huge potential challenge, and I think that this is something we're going to have to deal with sooner rather than later.
Mr. Chair. First of all, what GCP's involvement in this is what?
Their involvement realistically is quite important, because typically, as you know, these campaigns are quite expensive, and typically the business community supports a good percentage of it, and the businesses who have the resources to be helpful typically look to the partnership for guidance as to what they should support. So I think that that it would, you know, we may get their support and we may not. But what I would say as a minimum is to simply disregard their process would not be smart. We should at least respect their process and give it our best shot.
Okay, secondly, thank you, Mr. Chair, for that enlightenment with regard to that. Secondly, this is a question of Councilman Gallagher, who's been asking, and I think we've been answered about the buyout, and it's been a legitimate question, and I heard a definitive answer just recently that there's not going to be an effort to going forward. I'm sorry if I'm asking your question, but maybe a new voice will give
can
us
ask
a new perspective.
So my understanding is there is not going to be a buyout this year, and I'm not aware that we're considering it.
Okay, why? What I'd like to see, and I have not seen a full-blown analysis of why not, and if we're going to be looking to increase a levy and go to the taxpayers, and we're going to short our most vulnerable residents who are going through an opiate crisis, which is causing this avalanche in great part, and if I want to see why in writing in a cost-benefit analysis on what this would yield and what the loss and fear would be of not having appropriate employment levels, which I understand is a consideration, but I've not seen an analysis. And who would be the one to prepare that?
OBM has prepared the analysis of what it would cost, what we would lose, what the cost would be, what we'd save. So I have a financial analysis that I defer to the executive on what we submit, but it would be HR who tells you why we're not doing it.
I'm sorry, you can't give us this analysis without permission from the executive?
I would want to discuss that with the executive first.
Okay, well, this is one council person that is asking to see this, because if we're the ones who are going to be responsible for moving this county forward when we see a deficit with, our Health and Human Service levy, I want to see this. And I think I'm going to stop.
I think this issue is of sufficient importance that it would either be in this committee or in Human Resources Committee or a combination of the two. So I would suggest that I should work with Ms. Brown as to how we should bring this before a committee hearing and okay.
It was shared with me through the executive, and he didn't tell me it was sensitive information, so I feel free to, let you know. And I know other people know this, that they discussed it, that they put it in front of directors, and that Children and Family Services in particular came back concerned that many of their employees would leave and they'd be left holding the bag, so to speak. While you probably would lose a lot of people, that means a lot of people are near retirement anyhow. Go ahead.
That's correct. So there are options as it relates to the early retirement incentive programs.
Sure.
You can replace.
Absolutely. And that's what.
Obviously, you don't want to replace everyone that you lose,
Right.
because then your savings would be minimal. But you do have the option to be discriminatory in terms of who it is opened up to. And like the last time we did it, the Common Pleas Court didn't participate. There were a couple other agencies that didn't want to participate. For the HHS agencies, you could either replace all of the social workers if that's a requirement. There was an issue so we've done a buyout the last two times. We did one in 2009, and then I forget what the other one was, 2001 or something like that. We need permission from ODJFS to have those costs reimbursed. So I know one year they didn't get permission because they were doing some replacements, but the second year we did replace in CISA, and they still let us reimburse. So you got to do your due diligence and start making calls.
You're being very diplomatic about it. I don't have to be.
Okay.
The reality is they put it out there. They got their feedback. And I think we're just dealing with a bunch of people that have never gone through a buyout in their history. I think we're dealing with a bunch of people, this is way over their head, beyond their pay grade. I think we're dealing with people that are scared of their own shadow right now. I think we're basically screwing the employees that could get out of here, and basically doing the same thing to our budget, where we would save approximately $60 million over to 3 years. Now, after that, we'd have to figure it out, and that's plus or minus 10 or whatever it is, depending on how you do it. Mm. And we're also dealing with a bunch of people that think we don't know what we're doing here and haven't done this before. We know what we're doing. I could throw a dart at the employee's handbook here with names in it, and that employee would be able to come in here and tell this administration better on how to do a buyout. And we all know that because we're all employees and we watch these things and we know these things. So the reality, Mr. Chairman, is it could be done. We have directors that are concerned that something's going to happen. And while that is legitimate, as the director here is reporting, you can handle this in various ways. You have complete control over how this is driven, on when people can go and how many people can go and who it's offered to. Like you said, the courts couldn't do it because at that point they couldn't replace at the point they wanted to replace at the full amount. You couldn't do it. It's very difficult for a court to do that. Mm. They have people that are experienced prosecutors and
right.
people like that. So it can be done. I just don't think the administration's heart truly is in it. I know the HR director was a very negative person in this whole process. And quite honestly, I don't think he knows what he's doing. And I've stated that publicly, and I'll state it again. I don't understand how he's even still here, but that's something for another day. So this is something we could do. This is something that would save us money. This is something that would move employees out to enjoy the rest of their lives with a decent retirement, where they're going to get to anyhow. So to fall back onto we're not going to do it because we're scared too many people will leave, it's happened every single time, and this county has survived. And oh, by the way, that's 6, 7, 8, 900 people that'll be out enjoying retirement, which means a rehire of maybe 400 or 500 new employees that hopefully would be younger people looking for jobs that want a career in this county that will be working towards that retirement in 30 plus years. Keeping in mind now it's 32 years, not the 30 years. That's the magic number. So this can be done. I just didn't appreciate the way in which it was done. I just shut my mouth, and Ms. Simon got me going again. And when I'm hearing deficits, I'm looking at 60 million over 3 years. Boy, sure, that would look good, wouldn't it? And it would help our discussions going forward on whether or not we need an increase in HHS or not. Those are real dollars. These are real people. These are people that are under our control. These are our employees. These are people that make us look good. And I think we owe it to them to maybe look back at that maybe next year again, when maybe the HR department has a different look about it. So I'll leave it at that. But I don't understand many things the administration does. This is just another one of them.
Director, would you work with the executive and get the information to the council that Ms. Simon requested?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
May I ask a
Ms.
question
Baker.
outside of the HHS levy?
Absolutely, you can ask on anything related to this
Thank
report.
you. I just didn't want to interrupt.
Not the
you.
buyout.
No.
Continuing. No, not the buyout. The ERP.
Yes.
So
I'd rather talk about the buyout.
I know. That's fine.
Yeah.
Saved it till
Kidding.
last. So we've all been following that pretty closely, and 25 million was a budget that was probably, at least from the time that we started till now, is probably more inflated than we thought it was going to be. But now it looks like we're going to need all of the 25 million in order to accomplish the project. And there is some doubt, I think, that we may even go beyond the 25 million. But I see noted under assumptions that the reserves would not be required, and that we will stay within the 25 million. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
So I do want to be clear, because I think it's important to note that the 25 million number was developed in 2014, if not earlier. We issued debt for this project in 2014, and it was supposed to be 25 million. So I mean, I know you can cling to it, but I don't think it's necessarily fair, not to sound like a child, but to, hold the current management to that number, because it was developed by people who have been gone before even the people who are now gone were here. So I don't know, to give you a short answer, if that project is going to go over budget. There's a lot of conversations taking place. I do know that right now, yes, it looks like they don't need the full 25 million, but what's not being captured in that budget are all these costs in the operating budget that are directly attributed to the ERP. This was not properly set up in the very beginning to account for all of the costs associated with that project. So what we're doing right now, and we should have something very soon to present to you. I've committed we'll be done with all of the transactions by the end of June, but we are now kind of swapping to say, okay, this was in the operating budget. A portion of my time, for example, at least a little bit of my time should be attributed to that project. Well, that needs to leave the operating budget and go to the project. But similarly, we're live now with a couple of the modules, like EAM is live. The project is paying for people who are working solely on EAM. EAM's license is coming out of the project. So that needs to go to the operating budget. Right. So we have to do all these swaps. I think when we're done with all those swaps, we're probably going to be at about the 25 million. We're going to take some off, but we're going to put a lot on because we are trying to go back to estimate the time going back to like 2017. But it's a question for Jack Ryan, really, whether we're going to need more money on the project. I just don't know. For right now, we're just assuming that there will be no additional amendments to the contract. That's the last information I have, but we're in, one of our analysts meets with IT every month, if not more frequently there. So we're tracking it very closely, but I don't know that we're going to need additional funding. But you will see a substantial change to the budget from what you've been viewing over the last couple of years, because we really do need to account for all of these costs that, and you will don't get excited, but you will see us asking to increase IT's operating budget to move some of those operating expenses over. It'll net to zero, it's all general fund, but where the costs are captured does matter.
And are you accounting for the contingency, which I know is diminishing every day, but
It's like 700,000?
is it 700?
Yeah, so we are not assuming the contingency is going to be spent, right? We're not assuming, no, that's not right. We are assuming it.
That would be the 25 million, including
Yeah.
the contingency.
What? We're assuming it'll be spent? Yeah, so we're assuming that
We
will
are.
be spent. Because IT, I know, has said it's going to be spent, but we just didn't know exactly where, on what contract. But I think, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I do think, actually Michael Young said this, but it's going to be spent.
Yeah.
We just don't know how.
I just wondered where you were, and,
Yeah, so we're assuming all of it.
okay, thank you.
To follow up on that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, this swapping that's going to take place when some costs are going to move from the project to the operating side, and some costs are going to move from the operating side to the project. When do you expect to have all this accounting completed and have all this swapping done?
So in terms of having all the swapping done, end of June, because this is going to require fiscal agendas. We're going to have to change appropriation levels. We have, I think we're at 99% in terms of the non-personnel costs. We've already identified everything that should be moved. We had asked all of the affected agencies and departments to get back to us with their time estimates by this past Friday. I think we have a couple still outstanding, but for the most part, everyone's responded. So now we, and by we, I mean the brilliant staff, have to look into that and analyze it and figure those numbers out. So end of June. But we should have, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I know you're going to say something, but we should know where we stand in the next probably couple weeks.
Okay, well, I like it when financial statements don't have a lot of footnotes.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, and so when you get the swapping done,
We're
we'll
trying.
have cleaner financial
Yes.
statements with fewer footnotes. So I appreciate that.
And you have an accurate, then if someone calls me and says, which they do all the time, hey, what does it cost you to implement that ERP? We actually know. I mean, that's important from not only a transparency perspective, but for other people looking in who want to do this. I mean, I can tell you, I'm constantly asking other jurisdictions, well, what do you do? And if they weren't properly capturing their expenses, that would be to our disadvantage. So we don't want to do that.
And Director, one more quick question. When you said that you're assuming no more change orders, are you meaning no more change orders in addition to the one that's currently in the works regarding the 6-month change in the payroll schedule?
Do we have that? No, I don't. I'm not sure that I'm aware of. Are you aware of it? No, that's not in
Okay,
there.
well,
we don't know.
Hopefully that's not going to use up all the contingency. So when you say you're presuming the contingency is going to be spent, you're kind of there. But just be aware
Yeah.
that there's a change order in the works that's probably going to run in the maybe $600,000 or $700,000 range to cover the
a lot
6
of the
months.
contingency. So we'll follow up, and I'll get back to you today, probably. But I assume that it's coming out of the contingency? Because I
Yes,
think that
it
they
is.
would have told us if we were like real deal over budget.
No, it's
But,
coming out of the contingency.
Yeah, okay.
Councilman Tran.
The give and takes as you've been moving things back and forth between whether it's an operating item or capital item in regards to the ERP. We all know that we had targeted multiple dates in which going live was initially targeted for. We would already be live. We then had our next target date of the summer. We have now been pushed to December. We have gone through every person, even though this body asked for somebody to actually be the head of this as opposed to just having leadership. We've gone through every single leadership position on the board out there. I've never seen a project go through every single leadership position that's come and gone out of there. We're now back almost at square one in the area of leadership with still no one teeing this thing up. I will sit here and say I don't believe there's any possibility that our final go live is going to be December, which means it pushes us into an area of the next year, which then we're going to start hearing conversations probably about, oh, this is not going to be appropriate because we're now doing offline going lives at year-end dates and things like that were the preferred. And if we missed the next preferred, we're going to be pushed to that same kind of conversation, which I cannot believe that those are not going to be things that we know our internal advisor is pushed to that 11th hour date in December. We know that the external advisors are pushed to that date. If any of them fall over, we know we're going to have additional costs on the council side. And I just sit here finding it hard to believe we still don't have a leader on there, and we're going to finally go live with a final date of December without pushing over that date. And you better be prepared, I believe, for contingencies for money that's not in the budget that's going to be out there. I'm just like the Grim Reaper was talking about the
Still
self-insurance.
half empty.
Yeah. Well, that's another half-empty part of the glass too.
Right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm kind of a realist when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know, that's okay. I will say, good news that I do believe our go live for the budget reporting system is going to meet the deadline. We're supposed to go live this week.
Of the ones I would bet on, you still have leadership in place, and that'd be the one I would bet on.
Yeah.
Anything else? In the words of the general in the Iraq War, I think we hit some big things pretty good. So we got a lot to talk about.
We won that one.
If there's nothing else, I think we're done for today.
Okay.
So, any miscellaneous business? None? We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.